Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The girl's eyes rolled back as she thrashed against the restraints. Her name was Melissa Jenkins, sweet-natured high school cheerleader from Summersville, West Virginia, who'd never hurt a fly before last Tuesday, when she stabbed her mother 17 times with a kitchen knife. The local news called it a psychotic break. I knew better. "How long has she been like this?" I asked, keeping my distance from the bed. Pastor Coleman rubbed his weathered face. 3 days now. Her daddy's beside himself. The doctors at Charleston Area Medical Center couldn't explain it. Said it might be some kind of seizure disorder, but... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The restraints creaked as Melissa's back arched unnaturally. Her joints popped and cracked like kindling. The smell in the room, sweet decay and something sulfuric, made my stomach turn. My name is Nathan Blackwood. I'm not an exorcist. I'm not a priest. I'm a consultant. Someone who knows the rules when dealing with particular types of demonic entities. 5 years ago, I was a psychology professor at West Virginia University in Morgantown, specializing in religious psychosis and delusion. Now I help people with problems that can't be solved with medication or therapy. "It's a taker," I said, setting my worn leather satchel on a chair. "Mid-tier possession, probably attracted by emotional trauma." "Was there an incident before this started?" Pastor Coleman nodded. "Her boyfriend died in a car crash on Route 19, just north of town. Hit a coal truck head-on." I could see the scene in my mind. Twisted metal on that winding highway cutting through the Appalachian Mountains. Another tragedy in a region that's seen more than its fair share. I came to Summersville 3 hours ago, driving my beat-up Ford Taurus down from my cabin near Seneca Rocks. The town sits on the edge of Summersville Lake, a place of extraordinary beauty that masks centuries of suffering. The indigenous peoples who first inhabited these lands spoke of dark spirits in the hollows. The miners who came later told stories of creatures in the deepest shafts. Some truths are carried in the soil itself. I never planned on becoming what I am. After my wife Emma disappeared in the Monongahela National Forest 6 years ago, I went looking for answers. What I found instead was knowledge. Dangerous knowledge that came with a price. The locals where I live now call me the Devil Doctor. Some leave offerings on my porch, jars of honey, homemade bread, occasionally a bottle of moonshine. Others cross the street when they see me coming. "I can help her," I told Pastor Coleman, "but we need to follow specific protocols. There are rules when dealing with a taker. Break them, and we lose her forever. Or worse, it spreads." Outside, the spring rain pattered against the roof of the Jenkins family home on Mountain Road. Through the window, I could see the lights of Summersville glittering in the valley below, unaware of the battle about to take place in this bedroom with its faded floral wallpaper and cheerleading trophies gathering dust. "Whatever you need," the pastor said, his voice quivering slightly. I unzipped my satchel and removed a small wooden box inlaid with silver. "First rule: from the moment we begin, no one enters or leaves this room until sunrise. No matter what you hear, no matter what she says or does." "What else?" he asked. "Second rule: we use only her baptismal name. Nothing else." Pastor Coleman frowned. "But Melissa is..." "Her full name," I interrupted, "the one given at baptism." "Melissa Jane Jenkins," he said. I nodded, laying out the contents of the box on the nightstand. Salt. A silver mirror. A small bottle of water from Nicholas County's only natural spring. A red candle made from beeswax. There are 5 more rules, I said, meeting his gaze, and they must be followed to the letter. No exceptions. The girl on the bed began to laugh, a sound like glass breaking. Her voice, when it came, was not her own. "He can't save her," it rasped, lips peeling back to reveal bloodied gums. "No one can." I've heard those words before, in a dozen different bedrooms across West Virginia. I've learned not to believe them. "We'll see about that," I said, and began to work. Pastor Coleman shifted uncomfortably as I sealed the bedroom door with a line of salt. The Jenkins home was a modest 2-story on the outskirts of Summersville, the kind of place where family photos covered the walls and a Bible sat prominently on the coffee table. The scent of yesterday's pot roast still lingered in the hallway, a jarring contrast to the putrid smell emanating from Melissa's room. "Where's her father?" I asked, striking a match to light the beeswax candle. "Roy's staying with his sister over in Richwood. He couldn't..." Pastor Coleman's voice caught. "He couldn't bear to see her like this." I nodded. "Most couldn't. That's why they called people like me." "Third rule," I said, clutching the candle near the window. "If she speaks to you directly or calls you by name, don't respond, no matter what she says or promises." The pastor nodded, clutching his own Bible like a shield. "Fourth rule. If I tell you to leave the room, you run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Go straight to your car and drive to the Summersville Dam. Wait for me there." Rain hammered against the window, punctuated by distant thunder. Springtime in the Appalachians was always volatile. Beautiful one moment, violent the next, like the human soul. Melissa's body suddenly went rigid. Her eyes, which had been rolled back, snapped forward to stare at me, bloodshot and yellowing at the edges. "Nathan Blackwood," she said, her voice overlaid with something deeper. "The man who lost his wife in the woods. Did you ever find what took her?" I kept my face expressionless, though the words cut like a blade. This was typical. Takers sensed emotional wounds and dug their fingers in. I'd dealt with enough to know better than to respond. "Fifth rule," I continued, speaking to Coleman but keeping my eyes on Melissa. "When I begin the binding ritual, her speech will change. She'll speak in what sounds like tongues. It's not. It's the entity communicating in its native language. If you understand any of it, even a single word, cover your ears immediately." I removed a small leather journal from my satchel, my grimoire, though I'd never call it that to a pastor. Its pages contained everything I'd learned about demonic entities indigenous to Appalachia, compiled from old mining records, church documents, and my own encounters. Sixth rule. No electronic devices can be operating during the ritual. Watches, phones, anything with a circuit board. Coleman pulled out his cell phone and an old Timex watch, placing them on a dresser across the room. I did the same with my own phone. "Last rule," I said, "and this is crucial. If at any point Melissa appears to return to normal, if she seems lucid, rational herself, don't trust it. The taker will imitate her perfectly when cornered." As if on cue, Melissa's whole demeanor changed. Her strained features softened, and tears welled in her eyes. "Pastor Coleman?" she whimpered, sounding exactly like the teenager she was. "It hurts. Please make it stop hurting." Coleman flinched but caught himself before responding. "Good," I murmured, opening my journal to a marked page. "Now we begin." I approached the bed carefully, staying just beyond her reach. Takers were cunning. They'd wait patiently for a mistake, then strike with inhuman speed. From my pocket, I withdrew a small vial of oil infused with yarrow and angelica root, harvested from my garden near Seneca Rocks. The mixture was based on an old recipe I'd found in the personal papers of Dr. Owen McGee, a physician who'd worked in the coal camps around Beckery in the 1930s. "Melissa Jane Jenkins," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I address only you now. If you can hear me, give me a sign." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, her pinky finger twitched. Once, twice. A subtle movement, but enough. "Good girl," I said. "Keep fighting." The thing inside her snarled, baring teeth stained with blood from where she'd bitten her own tongue. "You can't touch her," it spat. She invited me in. After Trevor died, she begged for the pain to stop. I stopped it. I began drawing symbols on her forehead with the oil. Ancient sigils adapted from Cherokee protective markings I had learned from an elder in the eastern part of the state. The taker hissed as the oil made contact. "Seventh rule," I said to Coleman, who watched with wide eyes. "No matter how much she bleeds, we don't stop until I say it's done." I started the incantation, not Latin or Hebrew, but something older. Words passed down through generations of Appalachian granny women and folk healers. The language of the mountains themselves. Melissa's body contorted, bones cracking as she fought against the restraints. The bed frame shuddered. Blood began to trickle from her nose and ears. "Jesus Christ," whispered Coleman. "Don't," I warned, not breaking the rhythm of the words. "Don't invoke anything right now." The candle flame suddenly stretched tall, burning blue for an instant before returning to orange. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me. "She killed her mother," the entity said, its voice now like grinding metal. "Cut her open while she slept. Do you really want that back in the world?" I continued the ritual, ignoring the lie. Mrs. Jenkins was in the hospital, badly injured but alive. Takers always lied when desperate. Melissa's back arched impossibly, and she let out a scream that couldn't have come from human lungs. The windows rattled. Somewhere in the house, glass shattered. "It's fighting," I told Coleman. "That's good. It means the binding is working." I poured a circle of the spring water around the bed, the purest water in Nicholas County, from a source that predated European settlement. "This will be a long night," I said, glancing at my watch one last time before setting it aside. It was 9:17 p.m., and we've only just begun. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the rolling hills beyond Summersville for a brief, brilliant moment. Then darkness fell again, deeper than before. The next hour passed in a brutal cycle of progress and regression. Each time I thought we were gaining ground, the taker would rally, forcing me to start certain elements of the ritual again. Pastor Coleman remained in the corner, lips moving in silent prayer despite my warnings about invocations. "You should tell him what really happens," Melissa's body said, head twisting unnaturally to look at Coleman. "About the ones you couldn't save." I ignored the taunt and continued working. The room had grown so cold that frost was forming on the window, unusual for April even in the mountains. The beeswax candle burned steadily despite the temperature, its light creating grotesque shadows on the faded wallpaper. "How many dead now, Nathan?" It continued. 8? 9? That family in Elkins, 3 generations gone because you were too slow." My hands faltered for just a moment. The thing smiled, knowing it had struck a nerve. "Rule 8, I said suddenly, turning to Coleman. "If it begins to speak about my past cases, start reading Psalm 91 aloud." The pastor looked confused. This wasn't one of the original rules I'd outlined, but he immediately flipped to the passage and began reading. "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." The entity hissed, attention diverted. I used the distraction to complete the next phase, sealing the demonic anchor points. Takers needed 5 physical connections to maintain their hold: eyes, mouth, heart, hands, and blood. I placed small pouches containing black salt and dried blackberry leaves at each point around Melissa's restrained body. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the girl beneath the possession. "This part will hurt." I grasped my silver-edged affame, a ritual knife I'd inherited from a hedge witch in Hampshire County, and made a small, precise cut across Melissa's palm. Her blood welled dark and thick, almost black. The taker inside her shrieked, a sound like metal grinding against stone. "What are you doing?" Coleman cried, breaking off his reading. "Keep going," I commanded. "The blood is its strongest anchor. We need to purify it." I caught the blood in a small clay bowl, then mixed it with white ash from the hearth of St. John's Episcopal in Charleston, one of the oldest continually operating churches in the state. The mixture fizzed and smoked. "Psalm 91, I reminded him sharply. The pastor stammered back into his reading while I worked. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the house with apocalyptic fury, drowning out the sound of the small town below. "You know what's funny, Nathan?" the entity said during a brief lull. "Emma called your name at the end, over and over, but you never heard her, did you?" My jaw clenched. "Don't engage," I told myself. "It's trying to derail the ritual." I applied the blood mixture to each of the pouches, completing the circle of binding. Ancient sigils I'd drawn on the floor around the bed began to glow faintly, not with light, but with a strange absence of it, as if they were pulling the darkness in. "Tell me about Melissa," I said, deliberately using her baptismal name again. "Tell me who she was before Trevor's accident." Coleman looked up from his Bible. "She is the kindest soul. Volunteers at the community pantry on Mill Street, tutors kids at Summersville Elementary. Never missed a Sunday service." His voice broke. "That's how I know this isn't her. Couldn't be." I nodded. "The taker targets the good ones. They're more willing to sacrifice themselves to end pain. Melissa didn't want to hurt anyone. She wanted to stop hurting." After Trevor wrapped his car around that tree on Route 19, she stopped eating. Coleman continued. Stopped sleeping. Her mother said she'd just sit in her room staring at nothing. The perfect breeding ground for a taker. They were opportunistic predators, drawn to emotional wounds like sharks to blood. The deeper the pain, the stronger their hold. "Where did it come from?" Coleman asked. "Is it, from hell?" I shook my head. "Not in the way you're thinking. Takers are indigenous to these mountains. They were here before the first European settlers, before the indigenous tribes. They're as much a part of this land as the coal and limestone." Melissa's body suddenly went limp. Her eyes rolled back, showing only whites. The restraints creaked as her muscles relaxed. "What's happening?" Coleman asked. "It's retreating," I explained, checking her pulse. "Gathering strength. We need to work quickly before it rallies." I removed a small stone mortar and pestle from my satchel. Into it went dried black cohosh, bloodroot, and a pinch of graveyard dirt from Beckley's Wildwood Cemetery, one of the oldest burial grounds in southern West Virginia. I added spring water and ground the mixture into a thick paste. "This is an old remedy," I told Coleman, "dating back to the Civil War. There was a midwife in Lewisburg who discovered it could draw out spiritual infections." "That's not in any Bible I know," he said doubtfully. "No," I agreed. "It's in something older. Knowledge passed down through generations of mountain healers." I met his gaze. "The Bible is a powerful book, Pastor, but it's not the only record of how to fight darkness. I spread the paste across Melissa's forehead in the pattern of an old Cherokee protection symbol. Her skin sizzled on contact, raising blisters in the shape of the mark. "Jesus," Coleman whispered. "It's not hurting Melissa," I assured him. "Only what's inside her." The house creaked around us, timbers groaning as if under some immense pressure. The candle flame guttered but didn't go out. "How did you learn all this?" Coleman asked, watching me work. I hesitated. This wasn't part of the ritual, but sometimes sharing my story helped to steady people through the process. After Emma disappeared, I spent months searching the Monongahela forest. The authorities gave up after 3 weeks, said she must have fallen into a ravine or been attacked by wildlife. I carefully placed dried mugwort around Melissa's bed, but I knew something else had happened. There were inconsistencies. Like what? Her footprints stopped in the middle of a clearing. Just stopped, as if she'd been lifted straight up. And there were other tracks, not animal, not human, circling the area. Coleman swallowed hard. I met a man near Dolly Sods who recognized the pattern, Gerald Holcomb, an old forester who'd seen 3 similar disappearances over his lifetime. He introduced me to others, people with knowledge about the things that live in the shadows of these mountains. Melissa suddenly gasped, her back arching again. The binding was working, forcing the entity to surface where I could confront it directly. "He's lying," she snarled, voice distorted and layered with multiple tones. "He sacrificed his wife, gave her to us willingly for this power." Psalm 91, I reminded Coleman, who had stopped reading in shock. He fumbled with the Bible and resumed. The entity was growing desperate, a good sign. I continued the ritual, drawing more symbols on Melissa's arms with the herbal paste. Each one burned into her skin, then faded, leaving faint red outlines. "You know the rules," I said directly to the entity. "You've broken the covenant. This girl did not give informed consent." "She begged for help," it countered, "prayed for the pain to stop." "Not to you," I said firmly. "She prayed to God." "And who answered?" It laughed, the sound splintering into echoes around the room. "Not your God, not her precious Jesus, me. I was there when she cut her wrists in the bathtub. I stopped the bleeding. I took her pain." I glanced at Coleman, whose face had gone pale. This was apparently news to him. "Is that true?" I asked. "Did she attempt suicide?" He nodded slowly. 3 weeks ago. Her mother found her in time. Another piece fell into place. Takers couldn't enter without an invitation, but suicide attempts created a loophole, a moment when the soul was partly separated from the body. I reached into my satchel and withdrew my final weapon, a small vial of thick, dark liquid. "What is that?" Coleman asked. "Oil from the burning springs near Charleston," I replied. "One of the few natural petroleum seeps in the state." The Shawnee believed it had power to trap malevolent spirits. The entity saw the vial and thrashed violently against the restraints. One of the bed's legs cracked. "Rule 9, I said quickly to Coleman. "If she breaks free, throw the salt in a circle around yourself. Don't break the circle until I tell you." I uncorked the vial. The pungent smell of crude oil filled the room, overwhelming even the stench of the taker. "Last chance," I told the entity. "Release her willingly, and I'll provide safe passage back to your territory. Fight me, and I'll bind you to the deepest shaft of the abandoned Hawk's Nest tunnel." Melissa's face contorted into a mask of hatred. "You think you're the only one who knows the rules? I've dwelled in these mountains since before humans crawled from the mud. I am the darkness between the trees. I am the cold at the bottom of the lake." "You are a parasite," I corrected, "feeding on a girl's grief, and you've overstayed your welcome." With that, I began the final phase of the exorcism, pouring the oil in precise patterns on Melissa's chest, while reciting the ancient binding words passed down through generations of Appalachian folk healers. The real battle was about to begin. The moment the oil touched Melissa's skin, the house itself seemed to recoil. Picture frames crashed to the floor downstairs. Light bulbs in the hallway exploded, sending the rest of the house into darkness. Only our candle remained, its flame now burning a deep crimson. "What's happening?" Coleman whispered, clutching his Bible so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "The binding is working. It's trying to break the physical connections." I kept my voice calm, though my heart hammered in my chest. Rule 10. If the candle goes out completely, strike a match immediately. We cannot allow total darkness. The burning spring's oil sizzled on Melissa's skin, but unlike the herbs, it left no marks. The oil was for the taker, not its host. I continued the ritual, reciting the words taught to me by Eliza Howell, an elderly woman from a hollow near Webster Springs, who claimed her family had been fighting these entities since before the Revolutionary War. "Ik the ut adrife," I chanted, the Old English words feeling strange on my tongue. "I drive you out." Melissa's body convulsed. Her eyes snapped open, but instead of her normal blue irises, they had gone completely black, like pools of oil. When she spoke, her voice overlapped with others, dozens of them, men and women, old and young. "We've been watching you, Nathan Blackwood," the chorus said. "Following your work across our mountains, you've become quite the nuisance." I faltered for a second. This wasn't the voice of a single taker anymore. Something had changed. "Stay focused," I told myself. "It's trying to distract you." "Tell me, Nathan," the voices continued. "Did you ever wonder why Emma went into those woods that day? What she was looking for?" My hands trembled slightly as I drew another symbol on Melissa's forehead. "Don't engage," I reminded myself. "Oh, but she was looking for something very specific," it said, lips curling into a grotesque smile. "Something we showed her in her dreams, night after night." A cold realization washed over me. Had Emma been targeted? Before I could process this, Melissa's body jerked violently. The restraints on her right wrist snapped with a sharp crack. "Pastor!" I shouted. "The salt!" Coleman fumbled with the container of salt I had given him earlier, pouring it in a hasty circle around himself. Not a moment too soon, Melissa's free hand shot out with impossible speed, fingers elongated and curved like talons, stopping just at the edge of the salt barrier. "Clever," the taker hissed, withdrawing with the shapen hand. "But your protection's weakened, Nathan. I can smell your doubt." I quickly secured her arm with a length of blessed rope from my satchel, tied with 7 knots, each sealed with wax from the candle. The entity fought against the new restraint, the borrowed muscles of Melissa's arms straining unnaturally. "If we exorcise this thing, will Melissa remember what happened?" Coleman asked, his voice unsteady. "Will she remember hurting her mother?" "Some of it," I replied honestly. "Like fragments of a nightmare. That's why she'll need your support after, to help her understand it wasn't really her." The pastor nodded solemnly. "Her mother's stable now. The doctors at Charleston Area Medical Center said she'll recover, but she'll carry the scars." I finished for him, physical and psychological both. A cold wind suddenly whipped through the room, though the windows remained closed. Pages of Coleman's Bible fluttered wildly. The candle flame bent horizontally, but miraculously stayed lit. "Someone else is here," I said, scanning the shadows. The presence was familiar. Another consciousness observing through the taker's connection. "Nathan Blackwood," came a new voice from Melissa's mouth, deeper and more controlled than before. "The mountain man who plays with forces beyond his comprehension." I knew that voice. I'd heard it 2 years ago in a remote farmhouse outside Martinsburg. Abaddon, I said, breaking my own rule about engaging. Some entities were too powerful to ignore. They demanded acknowledgement. Pastor Coleman made a small, frightened sound. Even he recognized that name from Scripture. "You remember," the voice said, pleased. "I'm flattered." "You're not welcome here," I replied, reaching into my satchel for a vial of Jordan River water I reserved for the most severe cases. "This is between me and the taker. Your presence violates the ancient boundaries." The thing laughed, a sound like cracking ice. "Boundaries change, Nathan. The old ways are failing. The protections weaken." "What does it mean?" Coleman whispered. I didn't answer immediately, focusing instead on drawing a final sigil on Melissa's forehead with the Jordan water. The entity, or entities, recoiled at the contact. "It means something's changing in the spiritual ecosystem of Appalachia," I finally said. "The balance is shifting." For generations, the supernatural forces in these mountains had maintained a kind of equilibrium. The native entities, takers, hollowers, miners, and watchers, kept to their territories and followed the ancient rules of engagement with humans. Something was disrupting that balance. The mining, I realized aloud. The fracking operations in the northern counties. Human activity had always influenced the otherworldly inhabitants of Appalachia. The bloody mine wars of the early 20th century had awakened things long dormant. The flooding of valleys to create reservoirs had displaced ancient spirits. Now, hydraulic fracturing was literally cracking open the deep places where certain entities had been bound. As if confirming my theory, the presence of Abaddon receded, leaving just the original takers staring at me through Melissa's eyes. "You begin to understand," it said, voice once again singular. "Change comes, Nathan Blackwood. Choose your allies carefully." "You're not my ally," I replied firmly, returning to the ritual. Rule 11. When an entity offers alliance, reject it 3 times. I continued the exorcism with renewed determination, anointing each of Melissa's restraints with the Jordan River water. The taker thrashed against the bindings, and the house groaned in sympathy. I could feel the weight of the mountains around us, pressing in. "I reject your offer," I stated clearly. "I reject your presence. I reject your claim on Melissa Jane Jenkins." Melissa's body went rigid, her back arching impossibly high. A scream tore from her throat that didn't sound human. The windows in the room shattered outward, sending glass spraying into the night. "Cover your ears!" I shouted to Coleman as the entity began speaking in its native tongue. A language older than human settlement in these hills. Syllables that twisted the air and left impressions of dark, cramped spaces and the taste of metal. For a dangerous moment, I understood fragments of what it was saying. Something about gateways opening and old bindings breaking. I quickly blocked my ears until the utterance ceased. "Why can't we listen?" Coleman asked, cautiously lowering his hands. "Their language rewires human brains," I explained. "Changes neural pathways. Listen too long and you start thinking like them." I'd seen it happen once to a folklore professor from Shepherd University who'd recorded a possession and studied the audio. Within weeks, he'd been institutionalized, carving symbols into his skin and babbling about the deep hollows where they wait. Melissa's breathing suddenly changed, becoming labored and irregular. Foam flecked her lips, tinged with blood. "What's happening to her?" Coleman asked, panic edging his voice. I checked her pulse, rapid and thready. The taker is damaging her body rather than relinquish control. Rule 12. If the host shows signs of physical distress, we shift to the emergency protocol. I reached into my satchel and removed a worn leather flask. Inside was a tincture of ginseng, sassafras, and foxglove, steeped in moonshine from a still near Pineville. The recipe had come from a healer in McDowell County who claimed it could temporarily separate spirit from flesh without death. "Hold her head," I instructed Coleman, who hesitated at the edge of his salt circle. "It's safe now. The taker is focused on internal damage." The pastor broke his circle and helped me administer the tincture, supporting Melissa's head while I poured a small amount into her mouth. The reaction was immediate. Her body seized, then went completely limp. Did we kill it?" Coleman asked, looking at Melissa's still form. "No," I said, checking her pulse again. It had stabilized. The tincture forces a kind of spiritual reset. The taker is still inside, but dormant for a few minutes. It gives the host a chance to reassert control. I leaned close to Melissa's ear. "Melissa Jane Jenkins, if you can hear me, now is the time to fight. Find your way back to the surface. Follow my voice." Her eyelids fluttered. For a brief moment, clear blue eyes looked up at me. Her real eyes, not the black pools of the taker. "It hurts," she whispered, her own voice emerging for the first time. "Please help me." "I'm trying," I promised her. "But you need to fight too. Picture a door in your mind and push through it. Push hard." Her face contorted with effort. I can feel it, holding me down. "Focus on something anchoring you to this world," I instructed. "Something that matters." "My mom," she breathed. She's alive," I assured her. "She's waiting for you." A tear slid down Melissa's cheek, a human response, not the taker's manipulation. But then her expression changed, hardening as the entity reasserted control. "Touching," it sneered, black bleeding back into her eyes. "But futile." "She's still fighting you," I observed. I felt her presence. "She's stronger than you anticipated." The taker hissed in frustration. "She is nothing." A momentary spark in the darkness. I smiled for the first time that night. "And yet she pushed you back, even if just for a moment." This was the turning point in most possessions, when the host, however briefly, reasserted themselves. It created a fracture in the taker's control, a weakness I could exploit. I nodded to Coleman, who understood and resumed reading from Psalm 91. As he read, I began the final phase of the ritual, marking each of the cardinal points around the bed with sanctified coal from the Beckley Exhibition coal mine, material that had rested in the earth for millions of years, absorbing the land's natural power. "From the depths you came," I recited, lighting each coal piece with the candle flame. "To the depths, return." The coal ignited with unnatural brightness, burning blue-white. The 4 points connected with lines of light, forming a square around the bed that then transformed into a cube of energy, encasing Melissa and the entity within. "What you're seeing," I told Coleman, who had stopped reading in awe, "is the original binding used by the indigenous shamans of this region. The pattern has been preserved in petroglyphs at Mount Carbon." The entity thrashed within the cube of light, its movements becoming increasingly desperate. Black fluid began leaking from Melissa's eyes, nose, and mouth, the physical manifestation of the taker's essence. "Rule 13, I told Coleman. "When the separation begins, do not touch the black fluid. It will seek a new host." The pastor nodded, keeping his distance as the viscous substance pooled on the sheets around Melissa's head. Her body continued to strain against the restraints, but the movements were weakening. "Is it working?" Coleman whispered. "Yes," I confirmed. "But we're entering the most dangerous phase. The taker knows it's losing its hold and will try one final counterattack." As if on cue, the black fluid began to move with purpose, forming tendrils that reached toward the edge of the binding cube. Where they touched the barrier of light, they sizzled and recoiled. "Keep reading," I instructed Coleman, who had again fallen silent in horror. Outside, the storm had intensified to near tornado conditions. The wind howled around the Jenkins house like a living thing. Through the broken window, I could see trees bending almost double under its force. "Almost there," I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. "Hold on, Melissa. Just a little longer." The black fluid continued to pool around Melissa's head, gradually separating from her body as the binding cube held firm. The room temperature plummeted further. Frost formed on the walls in intricate patterns that reminded me of the ancient petroglyphs at Mount Carbon. Not a coincidence. "Nathan," Pastor Coleman whispered, his breath fogging in the cold. "Look at the ceiling." I glanced up and felt my stomach drop. Black veins had begun spreading across the white plaster, radiating outward from the center of the room like a spiderweb. The taker was trying to disperse itself throughout the house's structure, a last-ditch survival tactic I'd only encountered twice before. "Rule 14, I said urgently. "If the entity attempts structural integration, all wooden objects must be removed from the binding cube." Coleman looked confused. "Wooden objects?" "The bed frame," I clarified. "It's wood, isn't it? Pine?" He nodded. "We need to move her onto the floor, inside the light boundary," I explained. "Wood from these mountains has a natural connection to the entities. It provides a conduit." The pastor stared at me in disbelief. "We can't move her. She's restrained, and that substance is everywhere." "We have to," I insisted. "Otherwise, it'll use the bed frame to anchor itself into the house permanently." Together, we approached the bed. The black ichor reacted to our proximity, tendrils reaching toward us like curious fingers before recoiling from the protection symbols I'd drawn on our wrists earlier. "On my count," I instructed. "We'll lift the mattress with her still secured to it. 1, 2, 3. We heaved the mattress off the bed frame and onto the floor, keeping it within the glowing boundary. The dark fluid sloshed, but remained contained. As soon as the mattress lost contact with the wooden frame, the black veins on the ceiling stopped spreading. "Thank God," Coleman murmured. "Not quite finished yet," I reminded him, returning to my journal. The next step was the extraction itself, physically separating the taker from its host. From my satchel, I produced a small clay jar sealed with beeswax and inscribed with symbols from the Adena culture that had inhabited these hills thousands of years before European settlement. The jar had been fired in a kiln near the ancient mounds outside Moundsville, a place of power where the barrier between worlds had always been thin. "What is that for?" Coleman asked. "We can't just remove the entity," I explained. "It needs to be contained. This jar is prepared specifically for that purpose. That little thing will hold that." He gestured to the roiling black mass that had now fully emerged from Melissa's body and hovered above her like a storm cloud. "It's not about physical size," I told him. "The jar is a symbolic prison, blessed at 7 sacred sites across the state, from Seneca Rocks to the grave of Mother Jones in Mount Olive." I placed the jar at the foot of the mattress and began the final incantation, words of binding passed down through generations of Appalachian healers, mixed with phrases from Cherokee, Shawnee, and languages far older. The taker thrashed more violently as the ritual neared completion. The black substance contracted and expanded like a beating heart, sending droplets against the binding cube's walls. Where they hit, the light barrier sizzled and momentarily dimmed. "It's weakening the containment," I observed grimly. "Rule 15. If the cube fails, your only protection is blood warding." I withdrew a small obsidian knife from my pocket. "Pastor, I need to strengthen the barrier. This will require blood, mine, freely given. Coleman's eyes widened. Blood magic. That's not what you think, I interrupted. This isn't demonic. This is the oldest form of protection magic these mountains know. Life force freely sacrificed creates a barrier nothing can cross. Before he could object further, I sliced my palm and let the blood drip onto each of the 4 coal pieces anchoring the cube. The barrier flared brighter with each drop, the light shifting from blue-white to a deep, pulsing crimson. Fortis sanguinum, fortis voluntas, I chanted. Strong blood, strong will. The phrase wasn't Latin as it appeared. It was much older, disguised in a familiar form to avoid persecution during the colonial era. The taker sensed what was happening and changed tactics. Suddenly, the black mass collapsed back toward Melissa, trying to re-enter her body through her nose and mouth. No! I lunged forward, breaking another of my own rules by breaching the perimeter of the cube. I placed my bleeding palm against Melissa's forehead, creating a blood barrier that repelled the entity. "Nathan, your arm!" Coleman cried out. I glanced down to see black tendrils wrapping around my forearm, burning like acid where they touched my skin. The pain was excruciating, but I held firm, continuing the incantation through gritted teeth. "Ki la he tu nastit la ki," I recited, the Cherokee words for binding a wandering spirit. With each syllable, the tendrils retreated slightly. "Pastor," I managed to say, "open the jar. Now." Coleman hesitated for only a second before reaching for the clay container and breaking its wax seal. The moment the lid came off, a powerful suction filled the room, like the sudden pressure drop before a tornado. The black substance was drawn toward the jar, struggling against the pull, but gradually yielding. "Don't let it touch you," I warned as Coleman held the jar steady. The entity fought the containment with everything it had, the room trembling with its fury. Objects flew from shelves, the remaining windows shattered. The walls themselves seemed to inhale and exhale, as if the entire house had become a living organism. "What's happening?" Coleman shouted over the cacophony. "Reality pushback," I explained, maintaining my position with my hand on Melissa's forehead. "When something violates natural law, the universe itself resists." With a final, wrenching shriek that existed somewhere between sound and thought, the entity collapsed into the jar. Coleman slammed the lid on immediately, and I moved to seal it with candle wax and blood. The instant the jar was sealed, an unnatural silence fell. The house stopped shaking. The storm outside abruptly ceased, the sudden absence of howling wind almost as startling as the noise had been. Melissa's eyes fluttered open, clear blue, no trace of black. She gasped like a drowning person breaking the surface, sucking in great lungfuls of air. "What?" she began, but couldn't continue, her throat raw from hours of screaming. "Don't try to talk," I said gently. "It's over. You're safe now." I checked her vitals, pulse returning to normal, breathing stabilizing. The marks from the binding ritual were already fading from her skin, leaving only faint pink traces that would disappear within days. "Did we do it?" Coleman asked, staring at the jar in his hands with a mixture of awe and revulsion. "Is it really contained?" "Yes," I assured him, wrapping a bandage around my injured palm. "But we're not finished yet. Rule 16. After containment, the vessel must be properly disposed of within 24 hours. "Where? How?" "There's an abandoned mine shaft in the New River Gorge, a place prepared for containments like this." I took the jar carefully from him, inspecting the seal to ensure it was complete. "I'll take it there at dawn." Melissa tried to sit up, and I gently helped her. Confusion and horror dawned on her face as fragmented memories began to return. My mom. Tears welled in her eyes. That wasn't you, Coleman said firmly, moving to her side. Your mother knows that. Everyone knows that. I began cleaning up the ritual components while they talked, dismantling the binding cube by extinguishing each coal piece with spring water. The cube's luminous walls faded, leaving the room in the dim light of the single candle. Will it come back? Melissa asked suddenly, looking directly at me. No, I said with certainty. Not this one, but... I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But what? Coleman prompted. But there are others, I admitted, and something's changing in the spiritual ecosystem of these mountains. The barriers are thinning. Rules that have governed these entities for centuries are breaking down. I thought of Abaddon's words, the sense of larger forces at work. Something was coming. Something that made even the ancient mountain entities nervous. Melissa's eyes drifted to the jar. What was it? What was inside me? A very old hunger, I replied after a moment. These entities have existed in the Appalachian Mountains since before human settlement. The indigenous peoples knew about them. The early European settlers encountered them. They've been given many names over the centuries: darksome ones, hollow lords, soul eaters. Demons, Coleman supplied. I shook my head. Not in the biblical sense. They're more like native wildlife of the spiritual ecosystem. Dangerous, certainly, but part of these mountains' natural order. Melissa lay back, exhaustion overtaking her. Will I remember any of this tomorrow? Parts, I told her honestly. Like fragments of a nightmare. The human mind protects itself by forgetting the worst. If only that were true for everyone, I thought, no mind flashing to Emma's face. Some memories never faded, no matter how much you wish they would. As dawn approached, painting the sky visible through the broken windows with streaks of pink and gold, I packed my supplies. The jar containing the taker was wrapped in a cloth inscribed with protective sigils and placed carefully in my satchel. Thank you, Coleman said quietly as Melissa drifted into her first natural sleep in days. I didn't believe... I believed in evil, but not like this. Few do, I replied, until they encounter it firsthand. I left him with instructions from Melissa's care and a small pouch of herbs to burn in the house for purification. As I stepped outside into the fresh morning air, I could feel the weight of the captured entity in my bag, a cold pressure against my side. The town of Somersville lay below, peaceful in the early light, its residents unaware of the battle that had taken place during the night. That's how it should be, I thought. Let them live in the daylight world, untroubled by the knowledge of what lurks in the shadows. I got into my car and headed toward the New River Gorge. The entity was contained, but my work wasn't finished. It never really was. The drive to New River Gorge took me along winding mountain roads still slick from the night's storm. My Taurus hugged the curves of Route 19 as dawn fully broke over the hills, painting them in shades of misty blue and gold. The world seemed washed clean, as it often did after both natural and supernatural tempests had passed. The jar sat in my passenger seat, wrapped in protective cloth and secured with a seatbelt. An absurd precaution that might have made me laugh if I couldn't feel the malevolence radiating from within it. Every few minutes, the car's radio would static, or the headlights would flicker, small reminders of the taker's presence, even contained. Rule 17, I said aloud to myself, a habit developed over years of solitary work. During transport, maintain constant awareness of the vessel. Entities can influence electronics and may attempt to cause accidents. As if in response, my car's engine sputtered briefly before smoothing out again. Nice try, I muttered, placing my bandaged hand on the jar. The wound throbbed in time with my heartbeat, the pain a sharp reminder of the night's events. I turned off the main highway onto a service road that followed the rim of the gorge. Few tourists ventured this way. It wasn't on the scenic maps and offered no Instagram-worthy vistas. But it led to places older than social media, older than photography, older even than the written histories of this land. The road deteriorated as I drove, eventually becoming little more than a dirt track through dense forest. Massive hemlocks and century-old oaks crowded close, their branches forming a canopy that dimmed the morning light. In the distance, I could hear the rush of the New River, among the oldest rivers in the world, carving through ancient rock. After another mile, I reached a rusty gate marked with a faded "No Trespassing" sign from the National Park Service. Behind it lay the remains of the Kaymore mine, one of dozens of abandoned coal operations that dotted the gorge. I parked beside the gate and retrieved my satchel and the jar. "Almost there," I told the entity, feeling slightly foolish for speaking to it, but knowing it could hear me. The jar vibrated slightly in response. I used a key, provided years ago by a park ranger who understood the region's stranger history, to unlock the gate, then proceeded on foot down the overgrown path. The forest pressed in around me, unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects fell silent as I passed. They sensed the jar's occupant. The path eventually opened onto a clearing where the ruins of the mine's processing plant stood. A skeleton of rusted metal and crumbling brick reclaimed by kudzu and Virginia creeper. Most visitors to the gorge never saw this place, instead viewing the scenic overlooks and hiking the tourist-friendly trails. This was the region's industrial graveyard, a reminder of the price Appalachia had paid for America's progress. I made my way through the ruins to a particular mine shaft entrance, partially collapsed and blocked with debris, deliberately so. A casual observer would think it completely sealed, but I knew the hidden access point, a narrow passage behind a fallen support beam. As I approached, the jar in my hands grew noticeably colder, the glass frosting over despite the warming day. The taker knew where we were going. "Rule 18, I murmured, setting down my satchel to retrieve a small tin of salt and iron filings. Before entering a disposal site, refresh all personal protections. I traced protective symbols on my forehead, throat, and the backs of my hands with the mixture, then outlined a circle around the mine entrance with the remainder. Only then did I slide through the hidden passage, jar clutched tightly against my chest. The air inside was stale and heavy with coal dust, despite the decades since the mine's closure. My flashlight revealed a tunnel extending deep into the mountain, support beams sagging ominously in places. I moved carefully, aware that one wrong step could trigger a collapse. After about 100 yards, the man-made tunnel intersected with something older, a natural cave system that predated the coal mining operations. The ceiling rose dramatically, opening into a cathedral-like cavern. Stalactites hung like stone daggers above a pool of water, so still it resembled black glass. This was the place Gerald Holcomb had shown me 4 years ago. One of 7 disposal sites across West Virginia where captured entities could be safely contained. The indigenous peoples had known about these places, marking them as taboo in their oral traditions. Later, early settlers had sensed their strangeness and avoided them, telling stories of strange lights and missing livestock. I approached the pool, carrying the jar with increasing difficulty. It had grown heavier with each step into the cavern, now weighing as much as a bowling ball, though its size remained unchanged. "Last chance," I told the entity inside. "You can accept binding to your native domain, or risk dissolution in the deep waters." The jar rattled violently in my hands, the lid straining against its seal. I'd only once had an entity choose dissolution, a particularly malevolent hollower that had killed 3 children in Preston County before I trapped it. Most preferred binding to complete destruction, returning to the spiritual ecosystem in a diminished form. This taker gave no clear response, just continued resistance. I would have to proceed with the final protocol. At the pool's edge, I knelt and began unpacking specific items from my satchel. 7 river stones collected from the confluence of the New and Gauley rivers, a small bottle of maple syrup harvested from a 300-year-old tree near Helvetia, and a length of copper wire mined from the historic Eckhart mine in neighboring Maryland. Rule 19, I recited, arranging the stones in a precise pattern around the jar. The binding must incorporate elements of earth, water, plant, and mineral from the entity's native range. I carefully unwrapped the jar and placed it in the center of the stone circle. Black fluid could be seen swirling inside, occasionally pressing against the glass like a trapped animal testing its cage. As I began the binding incantation, my flashlight flickered and died, plunging the cavern into darkness. I fumbled for the matches in my pocket, but before I could light one, a soft blue glow emanated from the pool beside me, illuminating the space with ghostly light. The water was bioluminescent, a rare phenomenon in these caves that occurred unpredictably. Some said it responded to supernatural energy. Looking at the timing, I was inclined to agree. By this eerie blue light, I continued the ritual, dripping maple syrup in a spiral pattern around the jar, while weaving the copper wire between the river stones. All the while I recited the binding words, a mixture of Shawnee, Cherokee, and the strange proto-language Gerald had taught me that seemed to predate both. The atmosphere in the cavern grew increasingly pressurized as the ritual progressed. My ears popped painfully. The surface of the pool began to ripple, though there was no wind, concentric circles spreading outward from some unseen disturbance in its depths. "Almost done," I said, partly to reassure myself. The taker was fighting harder than I'd anticipated, causing the jar to rock violently within its circle of stones. Then I heard it, a voice that wasn't coming from the jar. "Nathan." I froze. It was Emma's voice coming from the darkness behind me. "Don't turn around," I told myself firmly. Rule 20. During disposal, entities may manifest sensory illusions of lost loved ones. Engaging will break the ritual. "Nathan, please." Emma's voice came again, closer now. "I've been trying to reach you. It wasn't what you think in the forest." My hands trembled as I continued the binding, desperate to block out the sound of my wife's voice. This was a common tactic. Entities used emotional connections against practitioners. I'd encountered it before, but never with Emma's voice rendered so perfectly. "She's not here," I said aloud. "This is a manipulation." Of course I'd say that if I were a manipulation, the voice countered with Emma's characteristic pragmatism. "But what if I'm not? What if I've been trapped all this time? And this is your one chance to help me?" A cold sweat broke out across my forehead despite the cave's chill. The voice had Emma's particular cadence, the slight West Virginia accent she'd tried to shed during her college years, but that emerged when she was emotional. The jaw before me rattled more insistently, the seal beginning to weep black fluid around its edges. "You're losing control of the binding," Emma's voice observed. "You know what's happening, don't you? The boundaries are failing everywhere. I'm just the first to find a way through." That gave me pause. It wasn't what I'd expect from a simple manipulation. There was information there, specific information about the changing spiritual landscape I'd been tracking. "If you're really Emma," I said carefully, continuing the ritual motions, "you'll understand why I can't stop. Why I have to complete this. I do understand." the voice said softly. You always were so careful about the rules. That's why I never told you about my own research. I knew you'd try to stop me. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. Emma had been an anthropology professor, specializing in Appalachian folk traditions. Before her disappearance, she'd been investigating connections between mining disasters and supernatural occurrences. What research? I asked, breaking my own rule against engagement. What did you find? The jar's seal cracked slightly, a tendril of black substance beginning to snake out. Focus, Nathan, the voice urged, suddenly sharp. Contain it first, then we can talk. That was so quintessentially Emma, practical even in the face of the extraordinary, that I felt tears spring to my eyes. But I did as instructed, returning my full attention to the jar and completing the binding words with renewed determination. In nomine terrae et aquae, ligote ad locum metivitatis, I concluded, pressing my still wounded palm against the jar's lid. In the name of earth and water, I bind you to your birthplace. The effect was immediate. The jar's seal repaired itself, the escaping tendril snapping back inside. The river stones began to glow with the same blue light as the pool, creating a perfect circle of luminescence. The copper wire melted without heat, flowing into the spaces between the stones and hardening into a solid ring. The completed binding reminded me of the pictures I'd seen of the ancient stone circles at megaliths in Britain, a miniature Stonehenge sealing the taker into a prison it couldn't escape. I sat back, exhausted but satisfied. The ritual was complete. The entity was bound to this place, unable to leave the cavern or possess another human host. Well done, Emma's voice said, quieter now. I still hadn't turned around. Part of me was afraid of what I might, or might not, see. If you're really Emma, I said, then tell me something only she would know. A soft laugh echoed through the cavern. On our third date, you took me to Spruce Knob to see the meteor shower. You brought hot chocolate but forgot the cups. We drank it from the thermos cap, taking turns. You said it was the best mistake you ever made because it meant we had to sit closer together. My heart contracted painfully. That was exactly how it had happened, a detail I'd never shared with anyone. Emma? I whispered, finally beginning to turn. Don't, she said sharply. Not yet. I'm not fully here, and it's not safe. What happened to you? I asked, remaining still but desperate for answers. I found something in the forest, she replied, her voice now sounding more distant. A doorway of sorts. I thought I could document it, study it. I was wrong. A doorway to where? To everywhere, nowhere. It's hard to explain. Emma's voice grew fainter. The boundaries between worlds are thinning, Nathan. Not just here, but all across Appalachia. What happened with that girl in Somersville? That's just the beginning. The blue glow from the pool seemed to pulse in agreement, brightening and dimming like a heartbeat. How do I find you? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. How do I bring you back? You can't, she said sadly. Not yet, but you can help stop what's coming. There's a pattern to the breaches, the old mining sites, the fracking wells. They're creating fissures in more than just rock. Tell me what to do, I pleaded. Find my research. Emma's voice was barely audible now. I hit it where we first said, I love you. Before I could respond, the blue light from the pool suddenly intensified to a blinding flash. When it faded seconds later, the cavern was silent. The presence I'd felt, Emma's presence, was gone. I sat motionless by the bound jar for a long time, tears streaming silently down my face. After 6 years of searching, of wondering, I finally had confirmation. Emma wasn't dead, but whatever had happened to her in the Monongahela forest had transformed her into something I didn't yet understand. Eventually, I gathered my remaining supplies and stood on shaky legs. The binding was complete, the taker contained. But my work, it seemed, was just beginning. As I made my way back through the mine tunnel, a new sense of purpose replaced my exhaustion. If Emma was right, if the boundaries between worlds were failing throughout Appalachia, then the rules I'd been following might not be enough anymore. I would need to find her research. And to do that, I needed to remember where we first said those 3 words to each other, all those years ago. The afternoon sun was high overhead by the time I emerged from the mine. My phone, which had been dead in the cavern, suddenly powered on with a cascade of missed calls and text messages, all from Pastor Coleman. I dialed him back immediately, dread pooling in my stomach. "Natan?" he answered on the first ring, his voice tense. "Where have you been?" "I've been trying to reach you for hours. The disposal site blocks signals," I explained, climbing back toward my car. "What's happened? Is Melissa—" "Melissa's fine," he interrupted, "but something else isn't. There's been an incident at the Somerville Dam. They're saying a maintenance worker went crazy, tried to open all the floodgates at once. The police have the area locked down." I quickened my pace. "Possession?" "I don't know," Coleman admitted. "But after what we just went through, it seems like too much of a coincidence." "I'm on my way," I told him, reaching my Taurus and sliding behind the wheel. "Where are you now?" "At the Jenkins house. Melissa's father came home. He's with her now." "Stay there," I instructed. "Salt the doors and windows again. Don't leave until I call you." I ended the call and peeled onto the dirt road, mind racing. If Emma was right about the boundaries weakening across Appalachia, what we'd experienced with Melissa might be just the beginning. But first, I needed to find Emma's research, where we first said, "I love you." The memory came to me suddenly, clear as spring water. Hawk's Nest State Park, on the observation deck overlooking the New River. We'd been dating for 3 months. It was sunset, the gorge bathed in golden light, and the words had tumbled out of me unexpectedly. She'd smiled, kissed me, and said she'd been waiting for me to catch up to what she'd known since our first date. Hawk's Nest was less than 15 minutes from my current location. I made a quick decision, turning the car toward the state park rather than Somersville Dam. Whatever was happening at the dam was already under police control. Emma's research might hold the key to understanding the larger pattern. The park was busy with spring tourists when I arrived, families and hikers enjoying the overlooks and trails. I parked and made my way quickly to the main observation deck, scanning the area for anything that might be a hiding place. The deck itself had been renovated since Emma and I had visited years ago. The old wooden railings had been replaced with metal and glass safety barriers. Any hiding spot would have been removed during the renovation. "Think, Nathan," I muttered to myself, drawing curious glances from nearby tourists. If Emma had hidden something here, she would have chosen a spot that wouldn't be disturbed by routine maintenance. I moved away from the main deck, following a less trafficked trail that led to a smaller overlook Emma had preferred. This spot hadn't been upgraded yet, still featuring the same weather-worn wooden structure I remembered. Near the end of the platform was a bench where we'd sat that evening, watching the sunset. I examined it carefully, running my fingers along the underside of the wooden slats. Nothing. Then I noticed the small marker plaque mounted on the railing, a dedication to the civilian conservation corps workers who had built the original observation platforms in the 1930s. Emma had been particularly interested in the CCC's impact on Appalachian infrastructure. I crossed to the plaque and examined it closely. The bronze plate was secured to the railing with 4 screws, 1 in each corner. The bottom right screw looked slightly different from the others, newer, less weathered. Using my pocket knife, I carefully loosened the screw. It came out easily, as if it had been removed before. I worked on the other 3, and soon the entire plaque came away in my hands. Behind it was a small hollow in the wooden railing, expertly carved out. Inside was a waterproof USB drive wrapped in plastic. "Clever girl," I whispered, pocketing the drive. As I replaced the plaque, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. "Nathan Blackwood," I answered. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Officer Davis with the Nicholas County Sheriff's Department." The voice was professional but tense. "I understand from Pastor Coleman that you're some kind of specialist in unusual behaviors." "That's one way to put it," I replied cautiously. "We've got a situation at Summersville Dam. The maintenance worker who tried to open the floodgates is exhibiting some extreme behaviors. The paramedics can't get close enough to sedate him." "How extreme are we talking?" I asked, already walking quickly back to my car. "He's speaking in what sounds like multiple languages at once, has superhuman strength, and—" The officer hesitated, "and his eyes are completely black. The pastor suggested you might be able to help." My stomach dropped. Another possession so soon after Melissa's. This wasn't normal, even by my standards. "I'm about 20 minutes away," I told him. "Until I get there, keep everyone back. Don't let anyone touch him directly, especially if he's bleeding. And officer, don't look directly into his eyes." "Roger that," he replied, sounding relieved to have specific instructions. "We'll clear the area and wait for you at the north entrance." I drove faster than was strictly legal, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. I was desperate to see what was on it, but the immediate crisis took precedence. As I approached Summersville Dam, I could see emergency vehicles clustered around the north service entrance, lights flashing. Officer Davis met me at the perimeter, a stocky man with a thick mustache and wary eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, thanks for coming. The situation's escalated. He's barricaded himself in the control room." "Has he managed to open any dates?" I asked, retrieving my satchel from the trunk. "No, we cut the main power. But he's threatening to flood the valley if anyone comes near him." Davis eyed my satchel. "What exactly do you plan to do?" "That depends on what we're dealing with," I replied, surveying the scene. "I need to assess him first. Rule 21. Never assume all possessions are identical. Each entity has its own signature and weaknesses." "Possession?" Davis repeated incredulously. "Like demonic possession?" "Something like that," I said, not having time to explain the nuances. "Who is this worker? Any recent trauma or life changes?" Davis consulted his notepad. "Thomas Reed, 52. Been working dam maintenance for almost 20 years. Recently lost his brother in a mining accident over in Raleigh County." That caught my attention. "Mining accident? When?" "About 3 weeks ago. One of those small private operations. Shaft collapse. Another connection to mining." Emma's voice echoed in my mind. The old mining sites. The fracking wells. They're creating fissures in more than just rock. "I need to see him," I decided. "Is there any way to observe the control room without entering?" Davis nodded. "There's a security camera feed in the monitoring station." He led me to a small office where a security guard sat watching multiple screens. On one, I could see the control room, a man pacing frantically, occasionally stopping to claw at the walls or bang his head against the concrete. Even through the grainy footage, I could tell this wasn't a standard taker possession. The man's movements were different, jerky and disjointed, as if his limbs were being controlled by competing influences. "This is something else," I murmured. "A composite entity, maybe. A what? Davis asked. A fusion of multiple spiritual fragments, I explained. Rare and extremely dangerous, usually forms in places with a history of death or trauma. Like a collapsed mine shaft? Davis suggested. I nodded grimly. Exactly like that. I began unpacking specific items from my satchel, different from those I'd used with Melissa. A vial of water from the Ohio River, a small bag of iron nails from the historic Harper's Ferry Arsenal, a bundle of dried foxglove wrapped in copper wire. What's the plan? Davis asked, watching me work. I need to separate the composite parts before I can bind them, I explained. Think of it like defusing a bomb. You identify the components before you decide which wire to cut. On the security feed, Reed suddenly went still. His head turned slowly until he appeared to be looking directly at the camera. A chill ran down my spine as his mouth split into an unnatural grin. He knows we're watching. The security guard said nervously. Reed's mouth began moving. Though the feed had no audio, I could see he was speaking, addressing us directly. Can we get sound? I asked urgently. The guard flipped a switch, and Reed's voice filled the small room. Not the voice of a middle-aged maintenance worker, but something layered and distorted, like multiple recordings played simultaneously. Nathan Blackwood, the voices said in unsettling unison. The mountain man who meddles in matters beyond his understanding. Davis looked at me in alarm. How does he know your name? I didn't answer, watching Reed's bizarre movements on the screen. He was writing something on the control room wall, using what appeared to be his own blood. Zoom in on that, I instructed the guard, who complied. The bloody writing wasn't in English, or any modern language I recognized. It was a form of pictographic script that resembled the petroglyphs at Mount Carbon, but more complex, more fluid. What is that? Davis asked. A message, I replied, snapping a photo with my phone. Not for us, for something else. Reed suddenly slammed his head against the wall with such force that blood sprayed across the concrete. Davis flinched, but I kept my eyes on the screen. We need to go in, I decided. He'll kill himself before the composite entity is finished using him. Using him for what? Davis asked. To communicate, I said grimly. These spirit fragments, they're coordinating, working together. I've never seen anything like it. I quickly assembled what I needed for a containment ritual adapted for multiple entities. The approach would be different from a standard exorcism. I would need to identify the dominant fragment and target it first, then work through the hierarchy. I need 2 officers with steady nerves, I told Davis. We'll enter through the emergency access door. I'll lead. They'll flank me. Davis nodded. What should they expect? Anything? I said honestly. Rule 22. With composite entities, standard protocols may fail. Improvisation becomes necessary. As Davis went to brief the officers, I found myself staring at the bloody symbols Reed had drawn. They seemed familiar somehow, reminiscent of markings I had seen in my research on indigenous spiritual practices of the Appalachians. On impulse, I retrieved Emma's USB drive and plugged it into the security station's computer. It contained a single encrypted file that prompted for a password. What would Emma have used? I tried our anniversary, her birthday, various combinations of meaningful dates. Nothing worked. Then I remembered the night at Hawk's Nest. After saying, "I love you," we joked about the Cherokee legend of the Lover's Leap at the Overlook. How 2 star-crossed lovers had supposedly jumped into the gorge rather than be separated. I typed "Lover's Leap" into the password field. The file opened immediately, revealing hundreds of documents, photos, and audio recordings. I clicked on a file labeled Convergence Points Map and inhaled sharply. It was a map of West Virginia with dozens of sites marked in red, a constellation of points that, when connected, formed a pattern identical to the bloody symbols Reed was drawing on the control room wall. "My God, Emma," I whispered. "You found it." A note attached to the map read, "Nathan, if you're reading this, I was right. The mining disasters, the dam constructions, the fracking operations, they're not random. They're following ancient ley lines that crisscross these mountains. Each disruption weakens the boundaries a little more. They're trying to create a convergence, a meeting point between worlds. I don't know who they are yet, but I'm getting closer. Be careful. The rules are changing." The final sentence was underlined 3 times. Davis returned with 2 officers in tactical gear. "We're ready when you are." I closed the file and pocketed the USB drive, my mind reeling with implications. If Emma was right, what was happening at Summersville Dam was just one node in a larger pattern, a coordinated effort to weaken the barriers between worlds. "Let's go," I said, gathering my supplies. The composite entity in Reed wasn't just a random possession. It was part of something bigger, something coordinated. And for the first time in my years of dealing with Appalachia's supernatural elements, I felt like I was facing an intelligent strategy rather than isolated incidents. As we approached the control room door, I silently added a new rule to my growing list. Rule 23. When the rules themselves begin to change, trust nothing, not even your own experience. Coleman's eyes widened. "Blood magic. That's not what you think," I interrupted. "This isn't demonic. This is the oldest form of protection magic these mountains know. Life force freely sacrificed creates a barrier nothing can cross." Before he could object further, I sliced my palm and let the blood drip onto each of the 4 coal pieces anchoring the cube. The barrier flared brighter with each drop, the light shifting from blue-white to a deep, pulsing crimson. "Fortis sanguinum, fortis voluntas," I chanted. "Strong blood, strong will." The phrase wasn't Latin as it appeared. It was much older, disguised in a familiar form to avoid persecution during the colonial era. The taker sensed what was happening and changed tactics. Suddenly, the black mass collapsed back toward Melissa, trying to re-enter her body through her nose and mouth. "No!" I lunged forward, breaking another of my own rules by breaching the perimeter of the cube. I placed my bleeding palm against Melissa's forehead, creating a blood barrier that repelled the entity. "Nathan, your arm!" Coleman cried out. I glanced down to see black tendrils wrapping around my forearm, burning like acid where they touched my skin. The pain was excruciating, but I held firm, continuing the incantation through gritted teeth. "Ki la he tu nastit la ki," I recited, the Cherokee words for binding a wandering spirit. With each syllable, the tendrils retreated slightly. "Pastor," I managed to say, "open the jar. Now." Coleman hesitated for only a second before reaching for the clay container and breaking its wax seal. The moment the lid came off, a powerful suction filled the room, like the sudden pressure drop before a tornado. The black substance was drawn toward the jar, struggling against the pull, but gradually yielding. "Don't let it touch you," I warned as Coleman held the jar steady. The entity fought the containment with everything it had, the room trembling with its fury. Objects flew from shelves, the remaining windows shattered. The walls themselves seemed to inhale and exhale, as if the entire house had become a living organism. "What's happening?" Coleman shouted over the cacophony. "Reality pushback," I explained, maintaining my position with my hand on Melissa's forehead. "When something violates natural law, the universe itself resists." With a final, wrenching shriek that existed somewhere between sound and thought, The entity collapsed into the jar. Coleman slammed the lid on immediately, and I moved to seal it, with candle wax and blood. The instant the jar was sealed, an unnatural silence fell. The house stopped shaking. The storm outside abruptly ceased, the sudden absence of howling wind almost as startling as the noise had been. Melissa's eyes fluttered open, clear blue, no trace of black. She gasped like a drowning person breaking the surface, sucking in great lungfuls of air. "What?" she began, but couldn't continue, her throat raw from hours of screaming. "Don't try to talk," I said gently. "It's over. You're safe now." I checked her vitals, pulse returning to normal, breathing stabilizing. The marks from the binding ritual were already fading from her skin, leaving only faint pink traces that would disappear within days. "Did we do it?" Coleman asked, staring at the jar in his hands with a mixture of awe and revulsion. "Is it really contained?" "Yes," I assured him, wrapping a bandage around my injured palm. "But we're not finished yet. Rule 16. After containment, the vessel must be properly disposed of within 24 hours. "Where? How?" "There's an abandoned mine shaft in the New River Gorge, a place prepared for containments like this." I took the jar carefully from him, inspecting the seal to ensure it was complete. "I'll take it there at dawn." Melissa tried to sit up, and I gently helped her. Confusion and horror dawned on her face as fragmented memories began to return. "Did I... my mom..." Tears welled in her eyes. "That wasn't you," Coleman said firmly, moving to her side. "Your mother knows that. Everyone knows that." I began cleaning up the ritual components while they talked, dismantling the binding cube by extinguishing each coal piece with spring water. The cube's luminous walls faded, leaving the room in the dim light of the single candle. "Will it come back?" Melissa asked suddenly, looking directly at me. "No," I said with certainty. "Not this one, but..." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "But what?" Coleman prompted. "But there are others," I admitted, "and something's changing in the spiritual ecosystem of these mountains. The barriers are thinning. Rules that have governed these entities for centuries are breaking down." I thought of Abaddon's words, the sense of larger forces at work. Something was coming. Something that made even the ancient mountain entities nervous. Melissa's eyes drifted to the jar. What was it? What was inside me? "A very old hunger," I replied after a moment. "These entities have existed in the Appalachian Mountains since before human settlement. The indigenous peoples knew about them. The early European settlers encountered them. They've been given many names over the centuries. Darksome ones, hollow lords, soul eaters. Demons," Coleman supplied. I shook my head. "Not in the biblical sense. They're more like native wildlife of the spiritual ecosystem. Dangerous, certainly, but part of these mountains' natural order." Melissa lay back, exhaustion overtaking her. "Will I remember any of this tomorrow?" "Parts," I told her honestly. "Like fragments of a nightmare. The human mind protects itself by forgetting the worst. If only that were true for everyone, I thought, no mind flashing to Emma's face. Some memories never faded, no matter how much you wish they would." As dawn approached, painting the sky visible through the broken windows with streaks of pink and gold, I packed my supplies. The jar containing the taker was wrapped in a cloth inscribed with protective sigils and placed carefully in my satchel. "Thank you," Coleman said quietly, as Melissa drifted into her first natural sleep in days. "I didn't believe... I believed in evil, but not like this. Few do," I replied, "until they encounter it firsthand." I left him with instructions from Melissa's care and a small pouch of herbs to burn in the house for purification. As I stepped outside into the fresh morning air, I could feel the weight of the captured entity in my bag, a cold pressure against my side. The town of Somersville lay below, peaceful in the early light, its residents unaware of the battle that had taken place during the night. That's how it should be, I thought. Let them live in the daylight world, untroubled by the knowledge of what lurks in the shadows. I got into my car and headed toward the New River Gorge. The entity was contained, but my work wasn't finished. It never really was. While keeping the dominant entity engaged, I had been quietly preparing the next phase of my plan. From my satchel, I'd extracted a glass sphere, one of my most precious tools, created by a glassblower in Milton who worked with sand from the oldest riverbed in North America. Rule 25, I said clearly. When a dominant fragment separates, trap it before addressing the remaining composite. In one swift motion, I uncapped the sphere and directed it toward the floating face. The vacuum effect was immediate. The entity shrieked as it was pulled into the glass container. I sealed it with a stopper made of wood from a lightning-struck oak on Spruce Knob, the highest point in West Virginia. The moment the dominant fragment was contained, Reed's body collapsed to the floor. The remaining entities, now leaderless, writhed beneath his skin in visible confusion. I turned to the officers. Help me get him into the center of the room. Quickly. Together we moved Reed's unconscious form away from the control panels. I retrieved salt from my satchel and created a circle around him, reinforcing it with river stones from 7 different West Virginia waterways, a composite binding for a composite entity. What about that thing? Davis asked, pointing to the sphere where the dominant entity swirled like black smoke. I'll deal with it later, I said, focusing on Reed. First, we need to save him. The exorcism of multiple fragments was more complex than a standard procedure. Each entity required a slightly different approach, different words of banishment. I worked methodically, addressing each presence individually, while maintaining the integrity of the containment circle. One by one, the fragments were forced out of Reed's body, some fleeing into the ether, others trapped in smaller containment vessels I had prepared. Throughout the process, Reed remained unconscious, his breathing gradually steadying as his body was reclaimed. After nearly an hour of continuous work, I extracted the final fragment, a traditional minor entity that had likely attached itself to Reed after his brother's death in the mine collapse. It emerged with a high-pitched wail before dissipating into nothing. Reed gasped and opened his eyes, normal human eyes, bloodshot, but free of the unnatural blackness. What happened? He croaked, voice raw from hours of otherworldly speech. You're going to be okay, Mr. Reed, I assured him, nodding to the officers to help him sit up. You had an episode, but it's over now. As the officers attended to Reed, I turned my attention to the glass sphere containing the dominant entity. It continued to swirl restlessly, occasionally forming that same unsettling face. You've won nothing, it communicated directly to my mind. The pattern continues forming. What happens at this dam was merely one node in a greater design. I studied the entity carefully. What is the convergence? What happens when it's complete? The face formed again, features arranged in what might have been a smile. The end of separation, the beginning of unity, all worlds becoming one, all beings intermingled. Can you imagine it, Nathan Blackwood? No more barriers between life and death, physical and spiritual, past and present. Chaos, I translated, the collapse of natural order. Evolution, it countered. Transformation. Your wife embraced it. Perhaps you will too, when the time comes. I secured the sphere in a lead-lined box, silencing the entity's voice in my mind. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't like the local spiritual entities I'd spent years studying. It was something older, something from beyond the traditional cosmology of these mountains. As paramedics arrived to tend to Reed, Davis approached me. "Is it over?" I glanced at the bloody symbols covering the walls, recognizing them now as matching the pattern on Emma's map. "No," I said honestly. "I think it's just beginning." Outside, the massive concrete face of Summersville Dam held back the waters of the lake, concealing whatever ancient science lay drowned below. I couldn't help but wonder how many other nodes in this pattern were active across West Virginia, how many other boundaries were being systematically weakened. One thing was becoming increasingly clear. The rules I'd relied on for years were changing. The orderly supernatural ecosystem of Appalachia was being disrupted by something new, or perhaps something very, very old that had been kept at bay until now. As I walked to my car, the contained entity's words echoed in my mind. Your wife understood. She saw the pattern forming years ago. I needed to review Emma's research thoroughly. If she had mapped the pattern of these incursions, perhaps she had also found a way to stop the convergence, whatever that might be. And perhaps, in doing so, I might find a way to bring her back from wherever she was walking between. 3 days after the incident at Summersville Dam, I sat at my kitchen table in my cabin near Seneca Rocks, surrounded by printouts of Emma's research. Rain drummed steadily on the tin roof, a sound that had once been comforting, but now seemed ominous, a reminder of boundaries being eroded, worn away drop by drop. Emma's files had been meticulously organized, the work of years compiled into a comprehensive theory about what she called the pattern. Her notes detailed how specific industrial activities across West Virginia, mining operations, dam constructions, fracking wells, aligned with ancient spiritual pathways that indigenous peoples had mapped centuries ago. Most disturbing were her recordings, dozens of interviews with locals who'd experienced strange phenomena near these industrial sites. Coal miners describing things moving through solid rock in the deepest shafts. Hunters encountering patches of forest where time seemed to flow differently. Fishermen on Summersville Lake reporting massive shadows moving beneath the surface, too large and too purposeful to be fish. The composite entity's words haunted me. The convergence approaches. The pattern nears completion. According to Emma's calculations, the pattern was approximately 87% complete. New fracking operations in the northern counties were accelerating the process. At the current rate, whatever this convergence was would occur within months. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Pastor Coleman. "Nathan? Melissa's asking for you. Says she remembers something important." "I'll be there tomorrow," I promised. After hanging up, I returned to the map Emma had created, a web of interconnected points spanning the state, each marking a location where the boundary between worlds had been weakened. The pattern indeed resembled the strange symbols the entities had written on the control room walls. Beside me sat the glass sphere, containing the dominant entity from the dam, secured in its lead-lined box. I could feel its presence even through the containment, a sentient wrongness pressing against the edges of my awareness. Outside, something moved in the trees at the edge of my property. I glanced up to see a figure standing just beyond the protective circle of iron I buried around my cabin years ago. Though the rain obscured clear details, the silhouette was unmistakable. "Emma," I whispered, rising from my chair. The figure raised a hand in what might have been greeting or warning. Then, between one blink and the next, it was gone. I grabbed my jacket and ran outside, crossing the boundary of my protections without hesitation. The rain soaked me instantly as I searched the tree line, finding nothing but disturbed underbrush where the figure had stood. On an impulse, I knelt and examined the ground. There, pressed into the mud, was a perfect footprint. Emma's size, Emma's distinctive stride pattern from the slight outward turn of her left foot. Beside it was something else. Symbols scratched into the dirt, already dissolving in the rain. I hurriedly took a photo before the markings disappeared completely. Back inside, I compared them to Emma's research. The symbols matched a sequence she'd identified as representing counterpoint or opposition, a way to reverse the pattern. Hope, cautious but real, flickered to life inside me. If Emma was trying to help me stop the convergence, there might be a way to save her too. I gathered the essential materials I would need for what was to come. A new journal for recording the expanded rules I was discovering. Maps marked with Emma's pattern points. Ritual components collected from sacred sites across West Virginia. The old rules were changing, but new ones were taking shape. As I packed my car for the journey to Summersville, I added a final entry to my growing list. Rule 26. When walking between worlds, leave markers for those who follow. Emma had left me a trail of breadcrumbs. Now I just needed to follow where they led, even if the path took me beyond the boundaries of the world I knew. Whatever the convergence was, whatever forces were orchestrating it, I would find a way to stop it. For Emma, for Appalachia, for the balance between worlds that had maintained this land's spiritual ecosystem for millennia. The rules were changing, but the game wasn't over yet.